classes. I know that you all
This
got a
meeting is
chance
being recorded.
to meet with Joe Fox last week, and he talked a bit about resume and cover letters, and many of you have had your cover letter or resume critiqued by Joe. And so Dr. Linda Kiwe and I are here to kind of do the second part of that. Dr. Kiwe actually was on the MEA board, and as was her husband, and has had a lot of years of experience in the K-12 system. So teaches in the career development program with me. So we're here to talk a little bit about, first, I'm going to talk about career readiness and interviewing, and then I'm going to turn it over to Linda. So if that works for you. And before I have a presentation to share, but before I do that, if you're in the Grand Rapids area, stop by the Advantage Center if you haven't picked up or if you don't have your job search handbook. This is free for you, and it is chocked full of amazing tips for new educators, and I mean, just so much information in here. So really a great resource for you. If you're not in the area, send me an email. We can maybe mail it to you. We can get it to you somehow, but I want to make sure everyone has that. So, all right, let me share my screen. In the chat, I would love for you all to answer to this question. What inspired you to pursue a career in education? I would just love to hear a little bit, just to be a chat. I think the reason I wanted to start with this is because the act of interviewing is really art of storytelling. And if you can find some tangible examples that you can utilize in your interviews, tell a story, kind of engage the listener. And so that starts with like, what inspired you? Tell us about a time. We're going to go over those behavioral based interviews. Some information from the book I just showed you. There's a strong demand for educators. It continues across the nation. The AAEE, Supply and Demand, said that demand now exceeds supply in 73% of the certification fields studied. Of course, many of the language, math, science, special education are shortages. Very few certification fields, according to the data, are in surplus. And I think the only one that was mildly was like social studies, I think. So the point that I'm bringing up, though, is the success of your job search doesn't solely depend on the demand. It also depends on how you articulate your value and why you are the best candidate for a position. And things that you can do strategically, expanding the geographic range of your search if possible. I know that geographic range, may not be feasible if you have a significant partner who also already has a job in an area and you're kind of like landlocked, or for whatever reasons, credentials in other fields if you have opportunity. And also there's a variety of employers, private, charter, alternative school. So we can talk about those too, or Dr. Kiwe can talk about those when we talk about unions as well. So another thing I wanted to talk about, and I don't know if Joe had talked a little bit about that as well, but your digital presence. I think it's really important in this day and age to consider your digital presence. I know that you do an online portfolio already as part of the education program, but it's really important to create like a first strong impression. And that includes things like Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. I think now LinkedIn is definitely an area for educators, as is Twitter, right? Like, so millions of people use Twitter every day, and the social atmosphere of Twitter is all encompassing, allowing people in nearly every field of study or interest. So the world of education is booming through Twitter. And allowing people to share their expertise. And so creating an account, building your profile, following other professionals, tweeting, those are all part of like your whole professional educators packet, or package, I should say. So, a little bit about the job search very quickly. How to get hired. School districts post job openings on their websites. I think it's important to monitor the websites of your favorite districts to search for vacancies, apply to those that are of interest to you. Follow or connect with your favorite school districts on social media. That kind of goes back to what I was just saying. And then, and I'll put this in the link, but consider visiting job websites. Handshake is also, if you don't already have a Handshake account, I believe Joe talked a little bit about Handshake. But if you don't have, your Handshake fully updated and your profile fully updated, we can talk about that as well. Any questions before I transition to interviewing for a position? If you do, just unmute and just throw out a question.
Would you say that Handshake is good for education? Because from what I've heard in the field and from personal experience as well, I haven't heard a whole lot of great things about it. And I've heard a lot better things about Indeed, which I've used as well.
I mean, Indeed is like a general everybody and all things. Handshake is where we put those jobs that come directly to Aquinas. So whenever we have a note that says, that please post this position, that's in Handshake. And I can show you how to make your searches in Handshake most viable. I think the most strategic way to do things is to have a number of like your key districts you're interested in and follow them. Ultimately, that's, one of the best ways. And then secondly, I utilize all the tools in the toolkit, right? So Handshake and Indeed is, for me, Indeed is hit or miss. Because sometimes, I find that there's just so many people who apply via Indeed that you water down your chances of even getting viewed. It kind of goes into the black hole of the internet. But that's a great question. So, and I think, LinkedIn is also becoming pretty trendy all around. It's been on the business, circuit for a number of years. But I think that now educators, if you have a local LinkedIn, if you haven't a LinkedIn account, you can connect with local professionals, including education. I mean, really every industry is now being represented there. So you want to think about, and I call them lions, right? Like lions are LinkedIn open networkers. So, they are definitely individuals you want to connect with, so you don't have to pay a premium to be part of it. So if you connect with individuals who have a lot of connections, then you can be a second party connector to that person. So if you haven't already, and if you are on LinkedIn, make sure to connect with me and Bridget and Joe and Linda, because we all have a lot of people that we're connected to. We can also show you, if you're interested, how to find alumni on LinkedIn. So, and I think, those are kind of little tips and tricks that oftentimes we don't utilize. So when interviewing for positions, there's a couple different ways, and probably you've had experiences with all three or four. So telephone screens, they require you to respond to like a series of questions over the phone. They don't see you. So you could be standing in your bathroom while you're doing the telephone screen. If you are using your telephone, a little reminder, make sure your outgoing voicemail message is very professional. Interviews, they are often video interviews, can be one way or synchronous. I've seen a lot of organizations now asking people to record your interview and then submit it. So we have a program called Big Interview. And if Joe didn't show that to you, I can show that to you, but it's a great way to practice. And And it's also a great way to practice if you're going to be doing video interviews, because it is exactly the model that they use, where you get asked a question and then you have to record your response and then submit that. Zoom, of course, is also a video, but it's a synchronous interview. And then in person, which allows really you to shine. That's your goal. Your goal is to get in the door. When you do the in-person interview, and if I have some, brave volunteers, maybe Linda and I can do a little bit of a mock interview with you after I go over these slides. I think that's always the most beneficial, is to get that experience and practice. But in-person interviews, you want to make sure, again, that storytelling. You also want to do your research. I think if you don't come prepared with information that maybe you've gleaned from their website or key initiatives that you've read. I have a friend who just interviewed for a position at Grand Valley, and she found on their website their PowerPoint or slide deck format. And so when they asked her to do a presentation, she utilized their model for her interview. We have one at Aquinas as well. Lots of people have those, like, canned or use this template. And that showed, that made her look like she was part of the team already. And that showed initiative. So those are the kind of things you want to do. And you want to avoid asking those salary, benefit, other perks of the job until you get the offer. Then that's where that negotiating comes into play. I think you need to be intentional. I'm not going to read this. This is going to be, given to you, so I won't read all of this. But I think it's important to come up with a couple of stories. When I was doing my interview, when I was interviewing for jobs, what I did is I put together like 5 or 6 stories, things that had happened to me, things that I had accomplished, like, I coordinated the little sibling weekend on campus. So I, wrote a little bit of a story about what I did, what were the outcomes, how many people, all of those things. A couple of stories that you can use to respond to a variety of different questions that are asked, those behavioral-based interview questions. Stories and relevant examples help the interviewers to see you, to visualize you as a teacher. I mentioned this already, but that big interview, this is the website to it. And I can't say enough really great things about Big Interview. They have modules that you can go through to learn a little bit about interviewing, but also like your first 6 months on the job, how to workplace situations or scenarios that they help you go through. So it's a great resource. All you need to do is create an account with your aquinas.edu address. Okay, this is the questions that I thought maybe Dr. Kiway and I could ask you a little bit about. These are the top 10 interview questions that I found for educators. And we can talk a little bit about other questions that you might have received along the way. But these are the kind of things you want to just at least be prepared to answer. You want to have an idea of how to respond to each of these different questions. You also want to be prepared to ask questions. So you want to have a couple of things in mind as you begin. We talk about the STAR technique. So behavioral-based interviews allow a candidate to demonstrate that knowledge and skills, and data is important. So if you could come up with anything that's quantifiable, think of it in the sense of that STAR technique. So what was the situation that you were involved with? What tasks did you need to accomplish, actions that you took, and then the results of those actions. So if you're just graduating from college, think about situations from your student teaching experience, field experience, classwork, class presentations. So if you're asked a behavioral-based interview question, you've never experienced that specifically, don't answer what you think you should do because you you don't want to like project, but if you would want to say, I've never experienced that situation, but something similar might be. And those are the kind of ways that you can then transition or kind of continue that conversation going. All right. So I thought we could stop now and maybe practice a little bit. I'm gonna have to stop sharing my screen though. So, oh, we got a lot of questions too. I love it. Thank you. I enjoy helping people understand complex ideas and love building relationships. That's awesome. Gina wrote, I love seeing what kids know and seeing that light bulb moment. That's great. And that's like a catchphrase for you, right? Like, I think that you could utilize that light bulb moment when you're interviewing. So, anybody willing to maybe unmute yourself and share any questions that you might have received in an interview that stumped you, or B, be a willing participant in an interview with us?
I have a question.
Sure.
So one of my high school teachers was nice enough to do like a mock interview with me, or a principal. And one of the questions he asked me was kind of like how, or it was data-based, like how I took data and then how I guess interpreted the data. And at the time I didn't have like any experience, so I didn't know how to answer this, but that was one question I got.
Oh, interesting. So, well, I can tell you how I would answer it. And then Linda, I don't know if you want to unmic and answer and respond too. Maybe we can both talk about that. So I think right now in our society, data is, king, queen. I mean, like the royalty, right? I mean, everything is so data driven these days. So I might actually start with something that would give me a chance to pause or think. I use a lot of phrases like, that's a really good question. Or, or, let me think about that if I need some time to pause, and that's okay. Then I would say, something to the effect that we have seen trends in recent years about the importance of making data-driven decisions. And so the approach to that is something that indeed should be taken seriously. And then I would say, from my experience, I think it's important to look at, your overall classroom and think about, when you're making decisions, making it with everyone in mind. And so I would kind of just talk a little bit about that and talk more about the importance of data driven decisions. So not necessarily saying how I would do it, but like that, because maybe you haven't, but you could use some examples. Like if you've had a classroom research project or anything that you've used data, then I would include that as well. Linda, what do you think?
I think that sounds good. And you might ask if he could clarify that a little bit more too. What was in, what exactly was he getting at? That can also give you a little bit more time to formulate in your mind a response.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Stacy just wrote, data is important. Your whole capstone project is about using data from assessments to inform your teaching process. So yeah, exactly. You should use the data you collect to adjust your lessons. So yeah, just answer it just like she said. So that's exactly it. So yeah. A great question in the chat. If you interview in a faith-based school, you'll be asked about your faith life and how you live your faith. The interviewers will also want you to know how you'll put your faith into practice. That's very true. Anybody want to talk a little bit about that?
I just know, like, I attended a Catholic school, and I've done most of my subbing there. So I've experienced a lot of, like that connection, but I've also met a lot of people that don't necessarily have a really strong faith life, or they're not Catholic necessarily, but they can still teach in that school just because they, connect to it. But I think it's just a way to show students that the love, that we all experience in just a specific way, that it's faith centered. And that was also something that I was a little anxious about, is if I taught in another school, like I could get in trouble for it. If I did mention faith, but I think it's a great like base topic of, treating the kids with respect and the love and dignity that they deserve. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think, what you're talking about is that holistic, treating, from the whole person. And so, which is, I think, no matter if you are at a faith-based institution or a secular institution, you're going to want to, care at the core for, a student's overall health and well-being and their humanness. So, I mean, you've invested a tremendous amount of time and money and energy, into becoming a teacher. So one of the things that you could do is think about the framework that you put into effectively interviewing, so you can exude confidence in your interview. I think that is also a really important thing. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that, about confidence and which I think research shows is the most important critical factor in winning over hiring committees is, and they've studied, this as far as, even if you think about it in terms of extroversion and introversion, which I don't love exactly, but individuals who have more extroverted tendencies and exude that sort of like external, tend to get hired more than individuals who might be a little bit more introverted. Not that they're the better candidate, but because how they project themselves in the interview. So if you do have more of an introverted tendency, I would say come talk to us and we can help you practice, how to kind of exude that confidence. Does that make any sense? No. And I think, there's a great book called Quiet, Susan Cain. If you haven't read it, as a teacher, you might want to actually. It's actually a really good book, but it's a great book about, talking about living as an introvert in an extroverted world. So, and I would say for all of us who are going to be working with large groups of students, you might want to think about that. So,
and introverts make great teachers.
Exactly. Well, and that's the whole thing of it, is that, how you project yourself in the interview oftentimes isn't necessarily going to equal if you're the best candidate for the position. So how you put your best foot forward is really important. So I have one story. When I was interviewing right out of graduate school, I learned quickly that even if I'm unsure of a position or unsure of myself, to kind of like put yourself in a role and role play, because I had one job interview. I don't know if you know the story, Linda, but I had one job interview where I went in and I wasn't sure. I didn't know if it was the right fit. I just was not feeling it. Like I wasn't 100% sure. And that actually showed in my interview. And I have a friend who actually worked at that organization. And the feedback that I got was that I just didn't seem interested in the job. So obviously I didn't get the job. I didn't, but it helped me. And obviously, if I was feeling that way, it might not have been a good fit to begin with. But what it taught me was that no matter if I have those doubts, I'm going to put my best foot forward each and every time, because what I ultimately want is the job offer. So then you're in the driver's seat And you can be the one to say, thank you so much, but I've decided to go with a different opportunity. So one of the things that you want to do when you're thinking about interviewing is think of the big picture. So begin your responses with no more than like 2 or 3 statements that show your comprehension, your like understanding of the question, and then evaluate kind of like what are like the critical things you want to get across in that conversation. The essential elements of a response is sort of the meat of the answer. So when we're talking about data, that's really, and Stacy put a lot in the chat. I won't read it, but I would read it because that's like the meat of your response. So offer clear, true to life examples based on your student teaching experience or your classroom capstone experience that sort of paint a picture in the mind of the interviewer. And I think Stacy alluded to this, but what role, does assessment play in your teaching? So an answer could be, I've learned that assessment is a powerful instructional strategy. If done well, it improves learning and can motivate the students. It also helps me improve my teaching. So good assessment or using good data can help me to know how a student is progressing so I can provide the proper intervention. So you kind of like think about how you would respond to that in that sort of way. Does that help? All right, I'm going to go back. And I'm going to share my screen a little bit more.
While you're doing that, I would also add, be careful of filler words like and well. So the more you practice, the less you're going to have those kind of filler words. So that's one thing I wanted to add. And also really research the places that you are interviewing. Places will ask you things like, well, why are you picking our school over Coopersville? Why Forest Hills over Byron Center? So really research those schools and have a good answer. Look at their mission statement, their value statement, other things on their websites so that you can speak to those.
Yeah, I agree.
And one other thing, be prepared to ask questions and center your questions around things like, what kind of professional development do you offer? And is that embedded, or do I get that professional development outside of the school hours? Sometimes it's part of the school day. Other times it's something on the weekend. Sometimes you pay for that. So just find out more information about professional development and also your supervision. Are you regularly supervised? How does that work?
Yeah. Having questions is essential. I think, besides what was just mentioned, like questions about what technology is available to educators, or what are some, school-wide or specific classroom management strategies in use. Anything that will kind of get them to be responding is important. So a lot of us are now doing interviewing remotely, right? So a couple of things. Joe had this great example the other, I don't know if he shared this with you, but he was doing a mock interview. As Linda said, we do mock interviews. Practice makes perfect. So he was interviewing with one of your fellow peers, and all of a sudden a roommate came into the screen and started making lunch, and Joe was like, okay, we have to stop because I'm super distracted with what's going on behind you, and I'm actually getting hungry now. I mean, I've had students who have done their mock interviews from their bed, lying on pillows. Like, I mean, we all know we live in the world of like dogs barking or doorbells ringing, and we get that technology crashing. But for, many of us, landing a position, and one of the positions that you really, are excited about is important. So if you receive an interview and it's for a video, treat it like a regular interview. Get dressed, put on your, attire. Background view is important. Make sure that you have good lighting. Make sure there isn't any disturbances around. You also want, some time, to have just preparing your speech, and how do you project yourself over a video is also important. So it is a bit of an art and a skill to kind of project yourself and enthusiastically project yourself via the video camera. So teachers have been doing that now for 2 years, but it's very, and it is a challenge as well. One of my tips is that if I am interviewing and I'm interviewing on a video or a phone, I like to stand up, because I think when you stand up, your vocal projection is just different than when you're in a sitting position. I also want to remind you of the importance of thank you notes for an interview. Thank you or a follow-up note is really important. And if there's a quick turnaround, you could send an email, maybe thanking them, sending some supportive material, or referring back to something that was talked about. And then a handwritten note, that is always going to be in vogue, right? To have that. So fewer than 10% of interviewees follow up with thank you notes. So by doing that, you're putting yourself in a really minority there. So to recap, and then I thought we could practice a little bit and then talk about unions. I want you to make sure, how many of you have had to plan a lesson? Has anybody had an interview where you had to do a lesson plan?
When I was a principal, I would often have, once I narrowed the field, I would have my candidates come in for either a second or a third interview where they were actually teaching to a classroom of sample students. And then I would even set up ranking sheets for my students to fill out and get feedback from them, as well as, I would often have a teacher or two, or maybe a parent in the classroom as well. And that candidate would teach that lesson. So that is a legitimate and often used technique, but in today's shortage of teachers, I don't know how often that is being used. So keep that in mind.
I agree. Yeah, because I think looking good on paper and saying the right thing in an interview is just sort of the tip of the iceberg when landing a job. So, and you and I graduated at different times. I had to do a lot of, I want you to put a presentation together on this topic. And so that was a big part of when I was interviewing. That's why I asked it as a question, like, do you run across that right now? Principals do incorporate it, like you said. So, you wouldn't be able to go through maybe a whole lesson cycle, but you want to have something that has a clear objective, constructive questions, interactive. I mean, think about your own lesson plans that have worked really well. And always like hit up your friends or, supporters like us if you want us to go over it with you. If you want us to sit down and go over your lesson with you, we'll be your practice students. So, questions? I want to make sure we give you all enough time. Yeah.
I have a question. So our last speaker briefly mentioned the idea that you might not want to answer a question in an interview. I think he used an example of someone asking about marriage status. What would you, is there a good approach to that if that comes up? And is like declining to answer a question acceptable, or does that automatically throw you out of consideration?
Well, marriage status is actually a form of like a legal questions, right? So there are certain questions that are not, and employers are prohibited to ask you questions that are not directly related to the job. So they could, obviously marriage status, race, sex, in many religion, birthplace, all of disability, all of those kind of come under protected things. So most of the times, if an interviewer does ask that question, it might be like inadvertent. They're trying to make casual conversation as they're walking down the hall. Oh, are you married? And you're like, so if somebody does that, it's often that they're not a seasoned interviewer, if you will, right? And so you have a few choices. And then, yeah, Linda, if you or Stacy want to jump in, you may answer the question if you feel comfortable. However, you may not, if you're feeling a little like, I don't really want to answer this. So you could just say, that, that's great. I want to assure you that my, anything that I'm in, my family responsibilities will not interfere with my abilities to do the job, because it kind of puts you in a really awkward position, right? Like, and so I wouldn't necessarily approach it and say, I don't want to answer that, because that might be a little off-putting, but I'd say it in a way that's like, yeah, that's a great question. And I know that oftentimes, we're one big family in educational institutions, but I'm not sure how that might be related to my qualifications as a teacher. So I might word it like that. I don't know. What do you think, Linda?
Well said. I would just respond that how does this impact what I would be doing? Just like Dana said, you might tell them you're not comfortable with answering the question. I guess it goes into how deeply they try to get information out of you. If you're just walking down the hall and he's not a seasoned interviewer, doesn't know any better, he or she, then it's one thing. But if they're really trying to find out more, are you your ethnic background and that type of thing, then there are laws that prohibit that. So
yeah, that's a great question. We are talking about, and Linda brought up about asking good questions. Good questions is the key for prospective teachers to finding that fit, right? So if you come prepared, can you describe your district's new teacher training or mentoring programs? Are there opportunities for me to be actively engaged in the school community? How does the district support, like you said, continual professional development? By inquiring about those types of cultural questions of the district, you're going to get a sense of if it's a good fit for you. And you'll have a little bit more understanding. So I really do think that prep work is very important. Other questions? If not, I wanted to give time. All right. So looking at the next slide, I'm kind of going to turn it over to Linda to talk a little bit about MEA. If you don't, I can put this in the chat. But, if you haven't had a chance to kind of look at the website for MEA, there is a number of different opportunities and resources on this website. I had a chance to go over it this week, and I was like, wow, this is chock full of great tips. So,
yeah.
Linda, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Oh, absolutely. This is so exciting for me to be able to talk about this. I taught for Grand Rapids Public Schools for a number of years. I was a teacher, counselor, and consultant. And then as I was finishing my doctorate degree, I was recruited by MEA to come and do professional development human rights training. So when I was a teacher and consultant, I was a MEA member, and then I became an MEA staff person. My husband was a president of one of the MEA units. So had a lot of background prior to coming to Aquinas with the MEA. But I'd like to ask you in the chat, if you would mind putting in the chat, when you hear of teacher unions, what do you think the purpose of a teacher union is? You could just put that in the chat. Good. A lot of good responses: to offer protection, to advocate. So good responses. I like that, because a union isn't just to bargain your contracts. It's so much more. And Michigan Education Association actually got rid of the word union. They preferred to use the word association, because it's encompasses so much more advocacy and benefits, supporting teacher rights, that type of thing, rather than just bargaining contracts. So the majority of my experience with Michigan Education Association was to provide professional development, human rights training for teachers. And in that role, I did a lot of different things. I was the advocate for teachers on special ed rules and regs. So in that role, I met with the Department of Ed consistently to advocate for rules and regs. You've probably heard of Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. And I would go in and work with the Special Ed Task Force and the Department of Ed and with the National Education Association, advocating for teachers whenever rules and regs were reauthorized. Our department, there were 6 of us that were at the Michigan Education Association who served as consultants. We also advocated on teacher rights when it came to ESEA, which is, I'm sure you probably know ESEA. Anybody tell me what ESEA stands for? ESEA. It's the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and that's reauthorized every once in a while. You might have heard of it as the No Child Left Behind Act. So when it's reauthorized, it comes out with another name oftentimes. And those rules and regs greatly impact how you perform as a teacher. And so we would advocate for teachers on your behalf to make sure that what is being put in the rules and regs meet with how you feel about life as a teacher. Parents also advocate, administrators advocate, and so you get all those voices in. Students advocate, you get all those voices, and every time it's reauthorized, you want to have your advocates there to make sure that your needs are being met. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And I also was the liaison for the student MEA. And so there was a chapters in many of the colleges. I don't think it was at Aquinas, but we had probably 50 colleges in Michigan at the time when I was at MEA. And there were chapters, and I realized that they changed the name from student MEA to aspiring educators. And let me just share my screen a minute to share with you that particular, if I could.
Anyone have specific questions about unions that we can talk about? They're different questions.
So here is a, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Dana.
No, you didn't at all.
So they're now calling it Aspiring Educators of Michigan. And it's a pre-professional organization for people preparing for the teaching profession. And you can read the rest of that bullet, but they provide resources. A few years ago, they had a conference every year. I don't know if they're still doing that. I've been gone from MEA now for 7-8 years. But they can help with things like interview skills and what's the first day of school look like, legal issues, advice to teachers. So there's a lot of information that especially new teachers face, and MEA can provide some of those resources for you. They can really provide some professional development while you are a new teacher and right on through, because you're, as teachers, you are always continually learning, right? We're always learning new information. You have to keep your credentials up and your endorsements up. So you're constantly having to learn more information and take professional development. So check that out. So a person by the name Annette Christensen is the person to contact regarding aspiring teachers. So that was my role at one time, one of my many roles, but and their number down there is I'm sorry, I taught too many classes today. I'm losing my voice, but is 800-292-1934. And you can just ask for Annette Christensen to get more information, or go on this site for Aspiring Educators of Michigan. So you can check out the benefits involved and more about their leadership and learning. So are there some questions?
It was really interesting, Stacy, when you were asking about the about unions. I talked to, Sean Duffy, who is an Aquinas grad, and he's actually going to send me a video of himself talking about it. So I will share it with you to share out with the class. Yes, Senor Duffy is amazing. But I also talked to Kathleen Poole, who is a Forest Hills public schools teacher. And then I talked to my sister-in-laws who work in Chicago. And Lynn and I were talking a little bit because, of course, union are different from state to state, right? But my sister-in-law, one of her things that she said was yes about joining a union, although she's not super happy with hers in Plainfield, where she is, Plainfield Township. Even if you don't in Illinois, you'll be bound by their contract. But if you do join, you have the opportunity to have a voice in forming that contract. So she said that was a really good thing to note as a new teacher if you happen to be going to the state of Illinois. So I think it's also an important thing to talk about where you live. You need to do some research and investigate, because each state might be a slightly different.
There's two major education. I'm sorry. Is there a question?
Oh, yeah. I was just wanted to ask, is there any really strong reason? Obviously, you have to pay union dues or whatever, but like, is there any really strong reason not to join a union?
My personal opinion is no.
Cool.
And because you get so many benefits besides the protection, and that's not to protect bad teachers, because every good teacher, will tell you we do not want bad teachers in the profession. It's not that at all. It's to provide due process in every case, to make sure that teachers aren't being unfairly evaluated or accused of various things. It's also to help provide your benefits and teacher salaries, because you'll know that Michigan is what they call a bargaining state. So that means that every school district, public school district, Stacy, I don't know if you were in public or private.
I was in both of
Okay.
them.
Okay, so in Michigan, we are called a bargaining state. And that means every public school bargains their own contract. And we have bargaining laws that protect those rights. That enables Michigan to be one of the higher paid salaries. You can go on onetonline.org and check out salaries in every state for teachers. And you'll notice that we are above the national average. And that's because we have teacher associations that bargain those contracts. If you go down to Florida, they do not. And their salaries are much lower. And then there's some states that every school district makes the same amount. So it really varies. But the two major education associations in the country are the National Education Association, and then Michigan is an affiliate of that. And then the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers. The National Education Association is a bit stronger and has more membership nationally and in Michigan. Good question.
Yeah. What do you think, Stacy?
Well, to my students, I'm putting in our Google Classroom a link to that ONET so that you can visit that when you have time to go through that. And you can look up salaries and that sort of thing.
Yep, and job forecast in all of the disciplines, from special ed preschool to high school, etc. All of those areas.
Yeah. Yeah.
But another, oh, let me just
go ahead.
Make another note. Another benefit of an association, a teachers association, is that they provide benefits, bargain benefits. And so every school district, again, bargains their own contracts. But usually in Michigan, we've been able to bargain Mesa Insurance, which is a subsidiary of MEA. And that is a top-notch insurance for for both teachers and administrators are able to get the MESA insurance. And I'll tell you, it's one of the best insurances you can have. So there's a lot of benefits. The website that Dana was sharing with you really brings forth all of the, puts forth a lot of the benefits for being part of an association.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in Michigan, I don't want to get into a whole lot about this, but we had the right to work legislation that was really a detriment to the Teachers Association. And so people didn't have to join anymore, but they got some of the benefits. And it's caused a lot of issues in school districts because people get some protection that they're not paying for. So a lot of hard feelings among teachers. I'll just leave it at that.
I know I need to actually leave at 6, but I'm sure that Linda will stay on if you have other questions. I wanted to make myself available if anybody wants to do a one-on-one practice interview, just email me and we could set up a time and go over those questions. I also wanted to circle back before I left about Handshake, because I just did a little query as Linda was talking, and there are, and I can show you this if you wanted really quickly, but there are 75 jobs found for Grand Rapids area full-time teaching in Handshake. And these are all like jobs that have been posted, you know, to us. So St. John Vianney is looking for a preschool teacher, 8th grade social studies, Whitehall District, New Era Christian School principal. Anyway, all of these are here. So I would say, I know, you know, Indeed, circling back to our earlier conversation, Indeed is great, but all of those, especially our Catholic school connections, are going to be found in Handshake.
And just as a reminder, I get job postings every single day. And I have those, I send those to Dana to post on Handshake. And we also post them on the School of Ed Course Connect page. So if you want to look at that, there's a tab right in there that you can link to that's all these job postings that are available. You can also do manual searches and go to districts and look for their employment pages. The Diocese of Grand Rapids has an employment page. Any district does. There are a number of them out there. And then you can go to the different ISDs. So Kent ISD is where a lot of the applications go forward. And once you fill out the application in AppleTrack or Kent ISD, then you only have to edit it in a few places for any other schools. So say that you applied to Kentwood Public Schools through the Kent ISD, you filled out the AppleTrack. Well, then you saw a posting in Forest Hills or or not necessarily Grand Rapids, Forest Hills or Godwin Heights. You could use your AppleTrack application that you already filled out, and there might be some additional questions that those other districts are asking, and then you just have to answer a few of them. I would recommend some of them ask for kind of paragraphs or essay type answers. For some things, I would recommend that you type that out in Word and save it on your computer. And then so that if you're asked that again in a different application, you just have to copy and paste it and put it in that new application. They're often the same type of question, and so you just have to edit a little bit about that. But if you save it, then you're not having to retype that same paragraph or essay every single time. And the same thing with your cover letter that we've been working on. You know, if you save that in Word, you're just tweaking it for every school that you apply to. Just make sure that you proofread it before you submit it. You know, if you're copying and pasting, you still need to make sure that you're you know, sending it to the right school. And as a principal, I have gotten letters addressed to the wrong school or the wrong person. And the same thing in, you know, some of the, within the letter, there's been issues in there too. And truthfully, I have done that myself, sent the wrong letter to the wrong place. It happens. So you just want to always double check yourself. Sometimes when you're in a hurry, it can get away from you, and then you're not going to get the job. You're probably not even going to get the interview. I know administrators are overlooking a lot of things right now. You know, they want teachers in the classroom, but they still want quality teachers there. Oh, that's a good advice, Dana, that spreadsheet.
Yeah, that will save you tremendously, because I know that there is a shortage, but you know, things can take time. And I've had it where I interview or I apply for a job and then I don't hear for a couple months. And then when I go to like review the job description, because they want me to come in for an interview, I can't find it. So I've come to creating like spreadsheets so I know where I interviewed, what status things were on. But yes, to creating a document with all your sort of templates. And we've all done it. Joe Fox, he talks about this, so I'm not sharing private information, but he sent a job application to Adrian College with Aquinas College, because when he was looking for his job, I mean, of course, then he ended up at Aquinas, so it all worked out. But he sent a letter to them with our name on it, and you know, didn't get an interview for that school. So it was our gain. Anyway, it was great to see you all. And
so
please
much,
let me know if questions. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.
At one time, MDE was also listing job openings. I don't know if they're still doing that. So
I'm not sure either. They may, and I think it just depends on the district, whether they're posting them there or not. They may still be doing that. I haven't looked recently for that. So
yeah.
But any other questions for Linda about unions or working in public schools? Excuse me. Well, thank you so much for your time and your input, Linda. This was very helpful.
Oh, absolutely. It's fun to talk about that. I loved working for the Teacher Association. I loved working, you know, helping teachers and parapros and support staff in the professional development arena. They moved me because we had a reduction in force, and they moved me from doing this teaching and learning, professional development, to labor consulting the last couple of years. And I hated it. It wasn't who I was. So bargaining people's contracts, arbitrations, grievances, all quasi-legal work, always contentious. And my main strength is harmony. So after a couple of years, I said, you know, I'm going to retire and go have fun. So that's why I came to Aquinas and back to just teaching and learning. And yeah.
Well, we love having you, and we do appreciate all that you've done for us this evening.
Thank you. And email me if you have any other questions.
Great.
You can just find me. I know I've had some of you students, Josie, we went on a cultural learning trip together last fall. How are you? And I imagine I've had some of you for CD career development classes.
Well, and Linda was on our invitation for tonight's seminar, so you could always look on your Google Calendar and her email will be listed there too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I love questions. Okay.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Linda. Thank you. I'm not going to keep you too much longer. I do want to share my screen a minute here. I'm going to, I just want to take you into Google Class. See some new material that to the top of the page. I'll probably move this into resources eventually. But for this week, I'll leave it here so you see what was just recently added. This is the Occupation Network. I put a link in here, and that's where you can compare salaries and all sorts of other requirements and so on. I have posted one link to a recording, and I'll get the other recording. There were 2 sessions so far on the role of diversity within the literature that we teach. It's valuable information for anyone in the classroom, especially those who are using or who are teaching any type of reading or language arts. But it certainly is worth a listen to all the way around, because diversity plays a role in all of our classes and the populations that we serve. Governor Whitmer has just made major announcements today about the education budget, and she is putting massive amounts of money into retaining and recruiting teachers. There will be stipends paid to teachers who stay in a district for 4 years or longer. And then there are also some stipends available to recruiting teachers, and then also to districts for setting up mentoring and coaching programs for new teachers in there. So a lot of really good information about what the state is doing to not only attract, but also retain teachers in the field. So look into that. I would have no doubt, I highly suspect that soon there will be much more liberal forgiveness options on student loans for teachers across the country. Of course, that's got to come from the federal government, but all states are suffering a teacher shortage. And so I wouldn't put it past our current administration to offer that up to teachers. They've traditionally offered it up to teachers who are in urban districts, inner city teaching and low income neighborhoods and that sort of thing. You can get student loan forgiveness teaching in those schools. But I think that because all schools are struggling with this, that would be available for you too. And I'm not sure, this teacher ethics hasn't posted yet. I'll have to look at that. But I did put some information in the resources about teacher unions. So there's a couple of different links in here that you might be interested in. There's 3 different articles there. I also put this in here into resources. It is a site for teaching special ed. It's a great resource if you're not a special ed teacher, but if you are a special ed teacher as well. And this is the Ontario Teachers Federation, so it's Canada, but they have such a great site here that I thought it'd be worth your while, because this is a great glossary for you to look at all sorts of verbiage that's used in special ed for your own self. There is a page here on key practices about differentiated instruction and inclusive education and all of that sort of thing, because that is kind of the trend right now, is mainstreaming as many special ed students into a regular education classroom. And you as regular ed teachers do need to know how to work with those students. And then this page is available for teaching strategies with special needs. There's all sorts of information here. So you can look at some of these lists, the student needs, and then if there's anxiety management, which so many students bring to school, these are things that you can, instructional strategies, these are some characteristics that you might see, some environmental things that you can do, and different ways to assess or to use with assessments. And here's some other resources that are linked here. And then you can go back to student needs, and again, kind of take a look at some IEP templates, that you could look there, and assessment tracking and that sort of thing. But there is so much that's in here. And then exceptionalities and diagnosed or medical or psychological conditions. And what's nice here is they give you definitions of these types of things, so that you can see other types of issues that might be linked along with that. But certainly apps for students with ADHD, 20 tips that help students with ADHD. There's a video about it. So all of these things are just really very helpful to you as a teacher, because I'm sure that you're running into students with all sorts of issues along the way. And then these are other exceptionalities. You know, these are some things that you can see. You may have some students who are gifted and, you know, physical disabilities and speech impairments and all different things. You can link to these, and they'll share with you other types of resources and things that might be helpful to you. So I wanted to make sure you saw all of that. The other thing I wanted to make you aware of is that the School of Ed is providing some MTTC prep sessions. They're all in the evenings. We do have one Wednesday, March 16th, and I'm going to look at our schedule because I'm willing, if you guys want to attend that, I'm willing to allow our that particular Wednesday session to be about MTTC test prep. Because it's the week before we meet with Dr. English, and I was just going to talk more about your capstone project, but I have another date set up for that as well, so we can use it for that. You could sign up for that. So if you sign into your Course Connect account and then go to the School of Ed Course Connect page, this is listed under Education Student Resources. There's study sessions, and you just sign up on the form for which one you want to attend. And then I do have another listing for some that are provided by the state. These are more general. You've got students from all over the state attending these, and so I don't feel that it's as personalized. These are actually much better. The state ones are much more generic, but Michelle can give you a whole host of information about the test and you know, paying for it and getting ready for it and studying for it and that sort of thing. And she'll show you all sorts of different free resources that are available to that. I did post the recording for the resume writing and interviewing that was with Joe Fox. And I think the rest of this is pretty much what we've had all along. So let me go. Are there any questions? All right, well, we are at 6:15, and even though we're scheduled to 6:30, I do like to try to get you out by 6:15. So enjoy your week. Next week is, oh shoot. Oh, it's the 16th. And I think that's a week that we're going to get back together and talk about your capstone and collecting data and that sort of thing, trying to get you ready for Dr. English's seminar on in March. And then the 23rd of February is the CPR session. So we will not have an evening session here. The week after that, March 2nd, is mandatory reporter training. So that's independent learning. There's a link to that on the Google Classroom. So you do not have to tune in that week either. And then the following week is the Aquinas spring break, so I don't make you attend seminar that week, even though you don't get that spring break. And then we'll resume soon after that. That's the MTTC test after that, or the test prep and that sort of thing. So just keep looking at your calendar. And as far as, I believe it's in JLH, and I posted the new flyer in under CPR, so that you can look that up. I have updated that CPR training and put that in there. And I'm pretty sure that's in JLH somewhere, probably 215 is usually the bigger room, but look at that flyer in our Google Classroom and that will tell you for sure which room it's in. Any other questions?
So after next, so we meet again next week,
Yes.
which is the 16th, but then we don't meet for 3 weeks straight, correct?
Correct. Okay, and how many of you need to take the MTTC test? Just raise your hand. All right, so how many of you think you would want to go to that training on Wednesday, the 16th? in
Is it
lieu-
like the one? So I have a question. Is it like the one they had last year? Because I think I went to one last year, but it was more like them walking us through registering for the test and not like.
if it was with Michelle Mazurek, it might be that same thing.
Okay, cool. Never mind then.
Okay, so we can just still plan to have class that night then. So, all right, be well and enjoy, and we will chat again next week. I'll see you next week at 4:30.
I had a quick personal question. I have a conflict after class. So for the CPR training, I actually ended up signing up for February 18th at Calvin College. They're doing that course there.
Okay.
Is that all right? Can I just
Yep.
send you the
Nope.
certification
You just have
info?
to turn in, when you get certified, you just turn in that statement of certification and you'll be fine.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And then you don't have to attend anything on the 23rd.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
I have a question about next week. So next week, Wednesday, is our first day of parent-teacher conferences.